Hello,
Yeah.
this is David Spark for Zoho, and I'm speaking with George Szanto, who is a tenured lecturer at Fontys University of Applied Science. George, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, thank you very much for having me, David. It's my pleasure.
So, explain to me, what do you teach at your university?
I teach several subjects. We have an English-based program, have students from 40 countries. So I teach basic international marketing, I teach export operations, and we have about 800 Dutch students, and part of their second year course is a customer relationship management class, and that's the one I'm teaching to them.
All right, now, Zoho has not been around forever with their CRM solution, but you teaching CRM probably way before that. Is that the case? Yes?
No, actually not, because I'm
Oh,
an
no?
industry veteran. So I've only been teaching 2 years, but I have used the CRM systems for, I guess, 15 years, because
15.
I've been working in industry for 25 years.
Ah, so being a teacher is a rather new gig for you, yes?
Yeah, I got a little tired of traveling the world, yes.
All right. So give me a little bit of history of your use of CRM. If you've been doing it for 15 years, like which was the first package you started with?
Let's see, there was one around the PCs in the 90s.
Probably
And
Act.
yeah, ACT. I used ACT, and I guess this was 99, 2000. Then after that, at another company, we did start using Siebel, and I was just a user at that time. And we slowly migrated to Navision, which was, I guess, just starting to come out. After that, I left the company, another high-tech company where I was on the management team. I implemented NetSuite. I spent a lot of time working with NetSuite. And then the last company I worked for, we were using some Navision. So it's pretty much some Siebel experience, Navision, and NetSuite were the three that I had experience with before Zoho.
So first of all, how did it come that you were going to be teaching a class on CRM at this university?
Well, actually, there was another teacher, and he left. And then they look around for, I guess, industry veterans that have hands-on experience in implementing systems, rolling them out, using them, supporting sales teams or agents around the world and partners. So apparently, I was one of the more experienced people. And I was quite enthusiastic about the technical side. I'm not such a big specialist on all kinds of theory, and I mean, there's a lot of theory, let's say the softer side, but I also do teach that, of course, in my classes.
So the gig, I'm assuming coming into the gig, they were looking at you to suggest packages to teach the students. And prior to this, did you have any experience with Zoho?
No, well, let me make a comment about what they're expecting. Okay. I mean, we also survey our students, and the 2 years before I started teaching, the students weren't very happy. It was a very dry course, just a lot of slides. They did interview some CRM experts, and we're an applied university, so the complaints from the students were, can we do something more hands-on and more practical, especially when there's out in internships or the recent graduates. They had never actually touched a CRM tool. So that's kind of the history of how they asked, we want to have a tool and some hands-on work.
Okay, so walk me through the process of you were getting these complaints from the students. You had to look for a tool, hands-on work. You already had a lot of experience with a bunch of different tools, not yet Zoho. How did you begin your investigation?
Okay, so I had some, let's say, boundary conditions and some real life experience. So one of the things that I found, not only as a user, but in general, when people graduate, or even if they have 10, 15 years work experience, is feature creep and overkill and functionality. And unless you're going to work for a multinational, and maybe 20% of our graduates do, but most end up at mid or small-sized companies, I was looking for a package that it could handle, and then the students can handle. And I said, if you want all the bells and whistles, you can go to Salesforce.com or maybe to Navision. But they have, 800 features, and the learning curve. I could spend 3 weeks teaching that, and because I've taught my staff to use it. And these were professionals that had to use it. And I said, no, we need to understand the concepts. And if you can work with a simple system, you can always extrapolate to all kinds of crazy extra functionality. So that was the philosophy. And then I surfed the web with a couple of parameters. You know, it had to be affordable. It had to be a SaaS system. I mean, we were using Fontys does have another CRM system, and I investigated it, but we didn't have any support. So pretty quickly after I said, well, I don't want Salesforce, I don't want Siebel, I don't want the big ones got eliminated. So that left me the universe of probably, I mean, there are 150 manufacturers. So I'm not saying I picked randomly. You know, I went to the Zoho website and started investigating, and it met most of those requirements I just said.
Awesome. So you've been teaching Zoho now for 2 years. Is that the case?
Yes, the first year I taught, which should be 2010, I used it. And in 2011, it just happened to be the class was offered twice. Normally, from now on, we offer it once a year. So I actually have taught it in 2011. I taught it in the fall semester, and I taught it in the spring semester.
And what learned, I guess, in teaching Zoho CRM to students? I mean, from the day you started with it to today, what has changed in your curriculum?
Well, the first time I taught it, I had the students essentially flow chart a process of they had some homework, and then they actually had to do a project in groups of 4 or 5. So they had to flow chart a commercial process and then implement it. And that was quite challenging. You have to program, and you have to set up tasks and reminders and warnings and workflows. For second-year students, that was quite challenging. So what changed after I reviewed this with one of my colleagues who's responsible for these 800 students, what we did was we decided, okay, we're not going to set up the task and some of the automation and flow charting. We're going to work more on a commercial process from a lead and all the way to essentially writing a quotation and a sales order. So we kind of changed the focus and narrowed it to saying, okay, if you're a salesperson or a marketing person, you either use the first 3 steps or the last 3 steps of the program that I'm using. Because I don't have all the features turned on.
So what are let's walk through the core elements that the students are learning. I mean, you sort of define you create kind of a case study. What are the elements that student must learn, I guess, to graduate your class?
Okay, I mean, to pass the class. It's 2 aspects. They have, I think, 5 theories, which are about 45 minutes. So those are about sales pipelines, psychology, the standard theory that's been around for about 25, 30 years when this became popular in the 1990s. But then after that, every class is a 45-minute workshop. And we start off with just setting up their accounts and entering essential contact data. You know, enter a person, enter a company. And what I have is I have a database of 300 bicycle companies. Because the Netherlands, if you might, it's a huge bicycle country. It's completely flat. Everybody, you know, even myself, I have 7 bicycles in 1 car. So there's a high for these Dutch students because they grew up in a bicycle society. So the project, you are a bicycle manufacturer. You are going to essentially go out in the Netherlands or Germany and promote your product. So the students go through a complete cycle. They start off with marketing. We have a lead, we have a person, we have a company. They enter that. And then the second week, they qualify the lead, and they have to put in notes. And then they, once the lead's qualified, eventually they have to write a quotation, usually around the 4th week of the class. Class is a 6-week class.
Okay.
And in the end, they have to write a quote, and then they turn the quote into a sales order. And to pass the class, because this is teamwork, just like in real world, most CRM systems on an end-to-end cycle, there's at least 2 people involved. There's a marketeer and a salesperson that closes the deal. So to pass the class, in small groups, they have to demonstrate these 6 steps. I give them a company they don't know, and they just get a one-page handout, and they have a 90-minute limit, and they have to enter all 6 of these steps correct on this one-page handout. So that's kind of the class.
Sounds pretty cool. So as you've been teaching it, I mean, and you have a long history of CRM, I'm wondering if any of the students have taught you anything. Have you learned anything about CRM from their experiences?
Well, it's usually, I typically have about 95 to 110 in the class. The first lecture, the first 5 minutes, I ask, who's used one? Because these are mostly 19 to 21-year-old students. There could be sometimes a few older. And I haven't learned too much. I did find out, because you can change language of Zoho. They first started off English, but they're supporting more and more. So one of the things, it starts off in English when the students get the account. And one of the ladies who has been using it at a hotel chain, for example, told me, you have to be able to use the system in English because we're a multinational company, and they don't provide it in 19 different languages. If you're in the hotel industry, you're expected to speak English. So that's one thing I learned, that yes, it's nice to have in all these languages, but anybody's a business, because these are business students, they have to speak English.
Well, that works for me perfectly.
But I'm thinking, what else have I learned from the students? Well, I learned that the flowcharting business processes with a tool I have a lot of experience in is quite difficult. So, pushing the buttons, but if I say you're going to manage 10 people, 5 from marketing, 5 from sales, you're a commercial manager of a company or the VP of sales and marketing, it's not so easy for them, these second-year students, to do that. Why? And they said, because we don't have any operational experience. Because we're all 19, 20, 21. We've worked at supermarkets, bagging groceries or lawns or stuff like that. But we've never worked at back office, or we've never, worked at team sales.
So is there unique cases where you're using Zoho in kind of, you think, a more alternative way? I mean, since you have all this experience with CRM, and it sounds like you're taking the students through a very standard process, but there anything unique you're doing in terms of reporting or anything like that?
Okay, so you're asking with the actual product?
Yeah, with the product, are you doing anything kind of cool and useful? Because everybody I talk to does something kind of different to kind of fit the model of their business.
Well, that's what I did the first year, where I had them essentially. There was this bicycle manufacturer, and I gave them some boundary conditions, and they had to essentially interview somebody, kind of essentially like they were building a system. So between being a CRM architect and then implementing it, and now I'm teaching more CRM usage. So I don't.
But they did have to architect it a little bit. Is that what you're saying?
2010, and let me tell you, there were 19 teams of students. So there were, like I said, 120 or 115 groups, were a little bigger.
So about 6 students per.
And the top 3 teams, because I asked for feedback, they turned in 15-page reports. And the last question I said, well, tell me about your experience. So the top 3 teams loved it. They said it's practical, it wasn't that hard, and they really learned how to not only use the product, but also to architect it, which was pretty amazing for second-year students in 6 weeks' time.
That is pretty impressive. Well, let me close with the very last question about advice you'd give to others. So, being that the students you have are very young, there's really may have little to zero business experience at age 1, and they're coming into a class like yours, they're going to go out on their own and start using CRM. What would be your first piece of advice of first jumping into any kind of CRM?
I teach that. It's first lesson. I talk about why systems, and they're well documented on the internet. But one of the reasons where systems fail is they're just too complicated. It's one of the reasons why I think so. People have asked me. I mean, some of my colleagues, we have about 60 other professors and lecturers. So there are other people who have experience. And they say, why is Zoho? And I said, because it's simple. and you can get an overview of it, and you can turn on more features. So what I tell students is all of them work about the same. You know, they're all a relational database, garbage in, garbage out. You know, the database is empty, or in this case, it starts with 300 stores, and then they just add more. But I said it's a people process, and of course, there's some technical features. So I have to, let's say, 4 or 5 points that I discussed of how it'll fail. And then I warned them. I said, at a company, you can get beat up in your management by not following rules, or you don't.
Well, do you remember what those 4 or 5 points of failure are?
Well, yeah. One is not getting senior support from management, for example. So you have mid-level people forced to use it, but the CEO or the other people don't use it. Training, turning on the system all at once. If you have 100 people or 200 people and expect they can all use it, it's better to start with the marketing department and the sales department and then the customer service department, put out. The other thing is, of course, trying to do too much at once. So it's better to maybe roll out certain features and then add them. Those are the main ones, probably. Well, of course, the other thing is the reporting. So what are you going to do with it? So if there aren't any strategic goals, then you're going to have a very fancy database and a lot of users, busy typing on their keyboards. But the question is, what is the management going to do with it? So I usually say, you have to have a good purpose defined for it, too.
Excellent. Well, George, thank you so much for your time. This was excellent. I was speaking with George Szanto, who is a tenured lecturer of the International Business and Management Studies for the Department of Fontys University. George, thank you again so much for joining me.
My pleasure, David. I enjoyed it. Thank you.